In this lecture, we will continue to build our project and developing the game logic. So in this lecture, you will find out what the ternary operator is, and you will learn how to add, remove, and toggle HTML classes. Alright, so we are still in the event listener, which controls what happens when the user clicks on the roll button here, right? And so we already calculate our random dice number, and we also already display the corresponding dice number in the middle of our user interface. So now we need to continue developing our game logic here according to the number that the user rolls. So if the user rolls a number different from 1, then the score gets added to his round score and he can continue to play, and otherwise, if he rolls a 1, then it's the next player's turn. So let's do that using an if statement, right? So if the dice is greater than 1, then add the score. So add score, and if not, then it's the next player. And I really like to do it this way. So write our if statement first and then add a comment telling what I'm going to do. So here I said that the dice number should be greater than 1, but I could also have said simply that the dice should be different from 1. And since we already know this one here, I'm going to show you the different operator, which is simply this exclamation point and then equal equal. And this is the one that doesn't do type coercion. So remember, the equality operator, we have the triple equal, and this one doesn't do type coercion, while the double equal does type coercion, and it's the same for the different operator. So we have this one which performs type coercion, while this one with the extra equal, which does not perform type coercion. So we always want to use this one. Alright, so let's add the dice result to our round score. So we have round score, and now I'm going to use the operator that I showed you in the introductory lectures, which is the plus equal operator. And now I can simply add the dice. Right? So once again, this would be the same as writing round score equal the current round score number plus the dice. But this here is much simpler and cleaner, so that's how we do it, right? And again, we can use the round score variable right here in this function because it was defined here in the global scope, and therefore, due to the scope chain, we have access to that variable in here. So we updated our internal variable value, but we also want to display it in the user interface, right? And we actually already did that down here, which I deleted, but we can get it back from here, right? Because you already know how to do this. So remember this trick here that works with the active player. So if the active player is the number 0, then the current 0 element will get the text content. And if it's player 1, then the current 1 element gets the content. And the content that we want is, of course, the round score, right? So each time after the player rolls the dice, we want to first update the round score and then display the round score in our user interface. And that happens in this element with this class. Okay, so let's quickly see this in action. So I'm refreshing and I'll roll the dice. So this is adding here because I have the active player as 1, right? So let's quickly change that, because the default will always be that the first player begins, so player 0. So refreshing this, now roll the dice. So 5 plus 4 is 9, plus 2 is 11, plus 6 is 17, so yeah, this is working. So let's see if we can catch a 1. So 34, 36. Alright, so here's the 1. So this time we didn't add the 1 here. Now what we want to happen is that now is the turn of player 2, right? So let's implement that. And we're going to do that here. So if the player does something that is equal to once, then we want the next player. So the first thing that makes sense to do now is to change this variable here, right? So active player will change from 0 to 1. And how do we do that? So if it's 0, then we want 1, and if it's 1, we want 0. So it makes sense to use an if statement here, right? Actually, we can use something else, which is still an if, but it's an easier way to write it. And that's called the ternary operator. And it simply works like this. So the active player is what we want to test. So we still have our test condition here. So if it's 0, then active player should be 1. Else active player should be 0. Okay? So this is the exact same thing as writing if active player equals 0, then active player 1, else active player 0. Okay, but this is much cleaner and much simpler, right? So for a very simple if statement, such as this one, I like to use the ternary operator instead. Okay, so let's see what happens then with the score. So we need to catch a 1 here. Alright, so now we have a 1, and now we should continue on this side, right? Because now it's player 2. Okay, so now we have a score here. But the thing is that we didn't restart at 0, right? We still continued with the 17, so 17 plus 6 makes 23. But we of course want to start this player as 0 as well, right? So there's something else that we need to do here, which is to set the round score back to 0. Okay, so when one player rolls a 1, then the other player becomes the active player and the round score is reset to 0. And now it should work, right? So and now it should go to the other player. Alright, so 3 and 1 again, so now it's this player's turn again. And alright, we start from 0 again, and the game keeps working. Now there's still a couple of things that we need to do here, right? Because as we know from the rules, as soon as the player rolls a 1, he loses the score. So it should be set to 0. So it should not be set only to 0 here, but also in the user interface. So you need to do a couple of things here. So let's select these. So current 1 and current 0. And once again, we're going to use the getElementID method for that. So document.getElementById, and now it's current 0.textContent. We want that to be set to 0. And the same thing, of course, for the number 1. Okay, and another thing that we should also do is to make it visible in the user interface who is the active player. So what I mean is this bold text here and this red dot, and also this gray background. So let me first show you in the HTML how that is actually achieved. So in here we have this active class on the player 0 panel that we do not have in the player 1 panel, right? So it's this class here that makes all the difference. Let me remove it from here to show you the difference. Alright, and now this is not active. So right now player 1 looks exactly the same like player 2, right? So what we have to do is to, as soon as the player changes, we have to remove the active class from the player 0 panel and add it to the player 1 panel. And this is one of the really cool things that we can do in JavaScript to style our applications, is removing and adding classes like this. like we're going to do now. So we need to, as you already know by now, start by selecting the element that we want. So document.querySelector, because it's now a class. So this one was called player0 panel. And then we need a class list. And in here we have a couple of methods to add, remove, and toggle classes. So let me first show you the remove one. Remove. And now all we have to do is to pass in the name of the class that we want to remove. And it's as simple as that. So now the active class will very simply get removed. And just before reloading the page, let's then add a class to the other panel. So querySelector and player1 panel. And once again, we need to use class list, and then we can simply say add. And once again, we need to specify the class that we want to add. So let's now see this. Alright, so I'm waiting for the one. Alright, so here it is. So the active class was removed from here and added to here. And like this, we can now visibly see here that player2 is now active. And the other change that we did before is also reflected, because this is now back to 0. Okay? But now you saw that I rolled a 1 before. I actually clicked a bit too fast here, but the player didn't change. And of course it didn't, because we didn't tell the code to do so. So let's go back. And one way that we could do this would be to say, alright, if the active player is 0, then do it like this. So remove the class from 0 and add it to player1. But there is a better way, because we not only have remove and add, but we also have something called toggle. And what toggle does is to add the class if it's not there, and if it's there, to remove. So in this case, if player0 has the class active, then it will remove it. And if it does not, then it will add it. Alright, so I will leave these here as your reference. Okay, but I will now do it differently. Okay, so I don't want to remove, I want to toggle. And here the same thing. And now it's going to work. Alright, so it changed to player2 and it changed back to player1. Alright. Okay, very nice. And now one last thing that I want to do is to also, when a player rolls a 1, to hide the dice again. So that when the next player's turn is, we don't have any dice here visible. And that's pretty easy, we already did that, right? But without looking at the code, we know that it's document querySelector, and it's the dice class actually. And then we need style, and then we just need the CSS property that we want to change. And this one is the display property, which we are setting to none once again. Alright. So let's reload this. Alright. So I rolled a 1, but it disappeared, and now it's the next player, and he has like an empty spot here to roll his dice. Now up until this point, we have no way to hold our points so that they get added up here in the global score, right? So that's what we're going to do right in the next lecture.